TV1, TV for life.
Good evening and welcome to Face for the Newsfirst team. I'm Niresh Eliatambi. I am delighted to welcome to our Newsfirst studio this evening Hina Jilani, attorney at law and well-known award-winning human rights activist who is from Pakistan, but she is known throughout the world for her activism, and she has held many important posts on human rights, especially in the United Nations, including fact-finding missions on Gaza and Darfur, and she's also been the special representative of the UN Secretary General on Human Rights Defenders. Welcome and good evening, Hina.
Thank you.
Lovely to have you. Right, so you are in Colombo for two very important conferences, and let's talk about the first one, which took place over the weekend, and that is the South Asian Regional Workshop on Human Rights, which was organized by the Bar Association of Sri Lanka and its Standing Committee on Human Rights. So this is it was a very important conference, and the caliber of intellectual debate that we saw from it among several South Asian luminaries in the human rights and legal field. It's wonderful to see. But let's talk about the need for resurgence of human rights as a topic in South Asia. Now, very often we tend to focus on human rights in the Middle East, in Africa, and so on. But in South Asia, somehow that particular conversation doesn't seem as vibrant as it used to be. Would you like to share your thoughts on this?
Yes, I think you're right. In the 1980s and the 1990s, civil society in South Asia really put in an effort to bring their national struggles to the regional level, because there were many common issues. Particularly in terms of my community of lawyers, we were always in the middle of the South Asia, the civil society endeavors to use the law and democratic institutions in order to make sure that the respect for human rights emerges or increases, where some kind of respect was already there. And then I think there came a time when these discussions really became much more national. And because of the freedom of movement across borders and other kinds of restrictions, it became very difficult in more recent years for those networks to sustain themselves and to have enough content and enough awareness of the commonalities of problems that we all share, whether it is civil or political rights, or it is socio-economic rights, the way that we see development, the way that we see access to justice being improved or the situation being further deteriorating. We are also very keen as lawyers to make sure that institutions like the judiciary, for instance, respects human rights and respects is divided between activism in the parliament, confronting legislators, making sure that the legislature is doing its work, making laws that would make human rights realizable, and also in courts to make sure that human rights receive the kind of backing that it needs in order to enforce the guarantees that the constitutions have made for fundamental freedoms.
So we sometimes tend to take human rights for granted when the laws are there to protect them. but it's a matter of how society views human rights and respects human rights, isn't it? Because it's all too easy for society to forget, and also you have politicians throughout South Asia who interfere with human rights, with judicial processes, and this is something which is fairly common throughout South Asia, wouldn't you say?
I think that's, of course, something that we have all acknowledged is something common. And of course, we also share a common history of colonialism in many of the South Asian countries. So that kind of awareness now seems to be going away. That what happens, and the world has now shrunk really, and what happens in one country affects the other. So we have come to this, we need to come to this realization that our struggles cannot only be national. The dependency of one neighbor over another really makes it very, very clear that civil society in particular cannot perform its duties, its functions, its role, unless we do things that bring us closer together, make populations understand what human rights are and why we are fighting for it. Unfortunate aspect of this whole thing is it's not just the leadership or governments that we have to challenge all the time. Our bigger challenge for us is educating the public. As you said, things move in a certain way in this country, and human rights are violated not just by governments, by non-governmental actors as well, and very much by the society. If we talk about gender-based violence, for instance, much of that occurs in the domestic sphere or at the social level. And the hindrance and impediments to changing the society really come from the people's thinking themselves. And the kind of activism we have is always, in many ways, either distrusted by the public because their own values haven't changed. So I think our job is also to recondition the public mindset in many ways, so that the leadership in that particular country faces a pressure by their own people more than anything else to respect human rights more, to make sure that institutions that are meant to protect human rights do their job properly.
Now, you, of course, are quite famous for your activism on behalf of women and gender issues all around. You were the co-founder of Pakistan's all-women law firm as far back as 1980, and also Pakistan's first legal aid center, and you were the founder of the Women's Action Forum. So what was it like back in 1980 and the early 80s, setting up these institutions at a time when the whole world was not so aware of the need for this kind of activism and for human society to move forward where gender issues are concerned? What was it like?
I think if you speak about the time that our activism on women started both at the legal level and at the social level, this was the 1980s in Pakistan, where there was a very repressive military regime that was in power. And that military regime had thought that after having executed a popular prime minister, to give their takeover by the military more legitimacy, they needed to use religion. So a lot of laws were enforced during that period, basically to, I think it was more like, these laws were with terrible sentences of public floggings, stoning to death, and things like that. This was more to instill fear in the society and the population, because they had killed a very popular prime minister at that time, who they had deposed and then hanged. So this was the kind of atmosphere in which the women's movement started in Pakistan. The Women's Action Forum became a platform from which women not just challenged the laws that had been imposed, which were hitting women very directly. So there was discrimination, there was a harsh kind of attitude which was trying to marginalize the whole female population, turning them out of the public sphere for one thing. So this was the time that this resistance and the urge to resist really created a movement for women. And it was a difficult time. I mean, this movement was not, started lightly. We all knew the consequences. I went to jail several times during Ziaul Haq's period in the 1980s, suffered a lot of brutality during demonstrations, and a lot of women came out. In fact, I think at that time, a lot happened because of the women's movement and how it had come into prominence, that the movement for the restoration of democracy also felt supported. And also, I have to say this, that I always believe that this was the period where a certain kind of transformation was taking place in Afghanistan. And Pakistan was part of that transformation and the internal changes in Afghanistan. I think the government at that time also wanted that the harshness that was happening in Afghanistan should be not just tolerable, but acceptable to the people in Pakistan. But I think our resistance to that really today is the reason why women are not suffering from the disadvantages that women in Afghanistan have to suffer. So I think these were very important times. And although these struggles and this movement started very spontaneously, it became really a struggle to resist retrogression of the society and to resist state oppression, discrimination institutionally that was being embedded in the behavior that the state had towards women, the female population, and not just women. Non-Muslim minority is in Pakistan suffered also because of these laws.
What strikes me about that era and the present day is that in the present day, if you go out to demonstrate, you take your smartphone with you, and as soon as anything happens, the police arrive, there's water cannons or whatever, or even just a simple peaceful demonstration, it's all over social media, real time, and that brings a certain amount of protection to those who are demonstrating, including the activists, students, political activists, and so on. But also the message of resistance is spread far and wide instantly. So the whole country, the region, the world gets to know about it. But back then, without social media, it was very difficult to make your voices heard, wasn't it? Because I can only imagine you're being an activist, perhaps demonstrating on the street or outside Parliament, and apart from possibly a few newspaper photographers, you don't have any method, any way to spread the word that there was such an act of standing up to repression. But yet your generation did not back down. It was, you perhaps you fought harder than the current generation.
I think you're right to some extent, of course. It took us 25 years to change the public sentiment on the laws that we were fighting against and trying to challenge. But at the same time, it's important to understand that there are certain pockets of the population, like journalists, like lawyers, who put themselves in the front line when these kind of regimes take over and there is total oppression. And there are certain kinds of populations who are particularly targeted because of the policies that these military regimes adopt. So I remember the first big demonstration that the women held against these discriminatory laws was on the 12th of February 1983. And of course, we were beaten up pretty badly. All of us were arrested, taken to the police station. But the journalists who had come out covered this so widely that this news spread nationwide. And I think that was the first time that people, generally common man in Pakistan, heard the word human rights. And this was, I think, a collaboration between the civil society and the journalist community. Of course, there was at that time a lot of restriction on all kinds. There was no broadcast media except the state media, but the print media was very, very courageous, I think, in carrying this message. Because for one thing, these were women out on the streets, and for another, they were out on the streets resisting something that was the so-called religious doctrine that this particular regime was promoting. So these are some of the things that helped us. But of course, it was difficult. My other kind of response to what you're saying is that my generation understood the absolute necessity of physical presence of those who are protesting. I think social media has a certain role, but that role is only limited, and it may spread the word, but it doesn't show you eye to eye the kind of commitment with which oppression is tolerated, even though things are not going well. People are willing to come out. People are willing to show their faces. These are real persons there, and not just a mobile screen where you are watching things. So these are some of the things that also gave us the courage to go on, gave us the opportunity of making these networks of people you trust, because they've been through hard times with you. I think people that have gone to jail with me became my best friends, lifelong friends.
Well, that certainly does happen, doesn't it?
Yes.
I mean, I've been in this business for 35 years, and there are people who walk up to me and say, "Do you remember me from 1991 when we were protesting and you were covering it, and the police chased you down?" That kind of thing. So that lifelong affinity is always there. But this nexus between religious extremism and dictatorship is also troubling, isn't it? And we've seen this not just in Pakistan, but in many other countries, including other countries in South Asia.
Absolutely. I think this is a nexus which people have studied it as well, but needs a deeper study. Why does this happen? These extremists become a tool for the state, a tool for oppression of the state, where the state outsources aggression, outsources violence. And this is the role that these extremists have in many countries played, including mine. And the other thing, of course, is that more democratic regimes that follow a military and oppressive regime are also people who have just come out from under the cover. They are still frightened. and these kind of weapons that those regimes have created, whether they are military regime or the more authoritarian civilian regimes, they create these extremists. And those that follow, even through democratic processes, civilian governments, parliaments, they are afraid of these people because they have a disproportionate influence on governments, disproportionate to the popularity they have. They never win elections. But what they can do is they have street power, and they can create a law and order situation with the snap of a finger. And that's what frightens governments. And these governments then turn this to their advantage. They don't have the courage to stand up to them and make sure that their duty to protect their population, they are able to fulfill. That they don't care about. They use them as their weapons for more control.
And in fact, it's all the more maddening because every major religion preaches respect for human rights.
That's true. And there is nothing in the universal values that have been adopted globally that in any way contradicts what our scriptures have said in different religions. Peace, tolerance, an empathy for the more marginalized, the more vulnerable. This is something that religion, I think, have always taught us. My point of reference, of course, is not religion itself. I think religion is the private affair of everybody, and they may practice it the way that they want to practice it. I have nothing against religions. But at the same time, I think to bring that unity of purpose in a population, you have to make sure that its humanity, its tolerance, its values, and its principles that religions have taught us, but they have now been derived from the religion and become universal values. I think that should become the point of reference.
Let's look at what's going on in South Asia today, and even some parts of Southeast Asia, where we've had, well, perhaps it started with Sri Lanka in 2022 with the Aragalaya, where the people were in fact quite desperate and they needed solutions, and they took to the streets and deposed the government at the time. But we saw this happen in Bangladesh last year, just a little over a year ago, where it was actually the very draconian crackdown by the government, which ended up with hundreds of young Bangladeshis being killed, which actually was quite counterproductive, and in the end the government fell and the Prime Minister had to flee. And the situation is still not quite stabilized in Bangladesh, but now we also saw it, well, to a lesser extent in Indonesia, in Timor-Leste, but more dramatically in Nepal. And one of the troubling aspects is that, unlike in Sri Lanka, where the protests were quite peaceful, the protests in especially in Nepal, were quite violent. So how do you sort of discern, what's the common thread, and why is it that some countries were peaceful, others were so violent?
My reading of it really is that, why do people protest as a last resort? Generally, I think people in the South Asian countries have been very tolerant of oppression. And it is rarely that they show the potential that every human being has for standing up to their rights, for their rights. At the same time, I feel that there are dictators and authoritarian elements in all our political elements, but more so in our state forces. whether they are the police or the military or paramilitary, they have driven people to the wall through their policies, their lack of sensitivity, their total inflexibility, and their non-responsive attitudes to the voices that they hear around them. They are not deaf. They know what is happening. They just rely on people's capacity to absorb oppression, to go on doing more and more, and not letting the steam out. You know, like a pressure cooker, if you don't let the steam out, it's going to explode. So that's what happens in many of our countries. And then, of course, there are those where the struggle for democracy has lasted long enough for some elements in the leadership to realize that we have to let the steam out. And there is lesser violence. In my role as the human rights special representative on human rights defenders, I came to a very considered view that there are assemblies that have been peaceful, but the responses by the governments have turned peaceful assemblies into riots, because the brutality starts and then the population strikes back. And there is genuine violence sometimes by the people in the demonstrations. At other times, the violence comes from the other side. But we have to understand that this steam, if it is let out more and more, there will be less violence in the assembly and demonstrations. This they don't understand, and they think they can control by killing people, by torturing them on the streets. But this will then go on becoming repetitious, and the demonstrations become more and more violent. And you will see, even in many countries in the West, there has been a reaction from the populations that have come out to demonstrate against the police, against the military. And that's something that I, as a human rights defender, cannot defend. I don't like violence. But at the same time, I do understand, I don't condone it, but I do understand why protests become so violent. The deep frustration leads people to acts of violence. The other thing is, I think, and you've also experienced that, I'm sure, many times, but we today in Pakistan are experiencing that to a very, very sad and unfortunate extent, which is mob lynching. There is the kind of courage that collectivity gives to individuals. An individual who would never think of killing a person on the street today would do it because there are so many others willing to do it. And this is something that I think we as human rights defenders are also fighting against. When I say our biggest challenge is to change the mindset of the population, that's what I mean. These things have emerged from the population and the kind of mindset that many sections of our society have. No government tells people to go and kill people on the street. They don't teach them mob violence, or many times don't order it. Sometimes they do, but in many cases they don't. So this kind of attraction for violence is created by violence that the state has perpetrated.
We've spoken about society, about the role of lawyers and religions and military and so on. But what about the judiciary in each of these countries? We see now, especially in Sri Lanka, there is a newfound respect for our judiciary because they appear to be standing up and delivering excellent judgments and taking bold decisions as per the law. And of course, for a long time, the public faith in the judiciary had been undermined by the judges and their behavior itself. What about the rest of South Asia?
Look, I think no amount of guarantees that our modern constitutions give for upholding the rule of law, for ensuring that people are able to realize their fundamental freedoms and human rights. If you don't have a judiciary that is committed not just to human rights and the rule of law, but to democracy, you will not have the kind of support that this institution is able to give. I think in every country of South Asia, there are some very good decisions that have come over the years, but that have come because of individual judges. The judiciary as an institution, unfortunately, have let the people down many times. And I'm speaking from my own experience in my country, but also from other South Asian countries. South Asian, we've seen very good judgments from India, we've seen very good judgments even in the past from Sri Lanka, from Nepal. But the thing is that was it because there were a few who understood what their role should be? Or was that the institution itself standing behind these principles? Unfortunately, institutions haven't developed that way. I'm very happy to hear that the Sri Lankan judiciary has been able to restore the respect and credibility that the courts should have. In my country, it is totally decimated. And I know that there are still many good judges in our higher courts, in our high courts, in our Supreme Court, but at the same time, the institution has really in the past and even currently not been able to play the role that they should have played. In the past, of course, our judiciary has a very checkered history of standing behind dictators rather than democracy and sustaining the authoritarian rule of the military for 11 years, for 10 years, but at the same time they have not been able to protect democracy for even one whole term for which a particular government or an assembly or the parliament has come into existence. They have not stood behind democracy as an institution. There are many other problems. I mean, I as a lawyer feel that we do criticize judicial decisions, but we do it in a fashion which is more constructive. And yet, I feel that one of the draconian laws that prevents the accountability of judges is the contempt of court law. Some judges have been very trigger happy and wanted to use this again and again. But I'm happy to say that I've observed now in the past few years, the Pakistan Supreme Court is now a little hesitant to use contempt of court. But there are other reasons for it, not necessarily very positive reasons. But I think these are some of the things that the lawyers should very actively take up with the judiciary. The law of contempt, the ability of civil society and more so the bar associations to educate judges. No judge should think that having sat on the bench and being elevated as a judge puts all the wisdom of the world in their mind. They don't acquire that wisdom. So a lot has to be done by judges to educate themselves, to sensitize themselves to the fact that there are vulnerable sections of the society that need more empathy, that need the application of affirmative action, be it women, be it children, be it minorities, be it poor peasants, laborers. These are some of the things that the judiciary would only learn if they have a little more connection with the human rights movement. Aloofness today is not necessarily going to the credit of the judiciary. They can be aloof to the extent of not imbibing prejudices, or aloof to the extent that they don't get influenced by their social relationships. but they should not be aloof from the debate that is going to go on in their countries.
Right. A very comprehensive answer indeed. But let's get to the other conference that you were a key resource person of here in Colombo, and that is the South Asian Elders Conference. And this is something, it's something new, and it is the wisdom of the elders collectively and individually to guide societies. And it's something very special when you think of it. You always think of activists being young and energetic and perhaps middle-aged, but it is in the end the wisdom of the elders who have been activists for many decades and who are also professionals. And that's something very special, isn't it?
I think it's important. It's important because the younger generation has the energy and to a great extent the skill now to channelize these new technology for further research, for further communication skills. But at the same time, experience and lived experience is very important. I mean, I'm part of the group that Nelson Mandela set up, which he called the elders, not because of their age, but because of the multiple situations that they had experienced, whether their experiences came because they were head of a state or a civil society activist like myself. So the elders are really not there to transfer wisdom alone. The elders are there to show people, not just the younger generation, that there are times when there are multiple choices. And it becomes very important for a nation to be able to go in the right direction, or for the younger generation to use the best path possible. So I don't think that age really matters, but the variety of experiences that people have gone through, which really make you eligible to become what the so-called elders are. I also feel over here that having gone through so many eras, people who have been more actively involved, whether it's politics or in the human rights or in the legal profession or rule of law issues, they have understood that it's not to be taken for granted that the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, the first article says that every human being is endowed with reason and conscience. Now, if you look around the world today, don't you feel that that belief is absolutely confounded?
Absolutely.
You look at Gaza.
Yes.
Where is reason and where is the conscience that the declaration says? But instead of saying we don't have reason and we don't have conscience, I would like to say we have the capacity to bring that about. And that's the job that the civil society has. We are not a government, and we are not elected by the people. What is our legitimacy? Our legitimacy is the relevance of what we do to the lives of the people. If the issues we take up are relevant to them, we will survive. Those who have taken up issues that have not really been relevant to the population, they die away, whether they are NGOs or movements.
Right, and we are unfortunately almost out of time, but my final question is the importance of networking, especially in this day and age, where networking should be much easier because of, well, technology. Of course, 30, 40 years ago, one had to write a letter and hope that the government doesn't intercept it, or book a long distance international phone call and hope that the government isn't listening. But today it is instant, and you have so many avenues of communication that it's pretty much impossible for governments to be listening in all the time. And so you have that amount of freedom to network. So how important is it, whether it is an elders network or a lawyers network or a judges network across South Asia? Because we, after all South Asians are very much alike, can't we?
Yes, we are very much alike, but I think what we have to understand is that if we are communicating amongst each other only through a remote medium, what are we doing? We have to engage governments, and if we engage them so that we put pressure. Also, I think we also have to understand the limited advantages of the social media. Of course, it has many advantages, I'm not denying that, but those advantages are not sufficient to create that person to person contact and relationship that you need to build a network, because you can only build networks if you trust each other, and that trust comes with your physical engagement with one person. So I think that I miss today. I miss people's physical presence in demonstrations. They will support you on the social media, but those who are watching you and those who are assessing your ability to put pressure, they don't get impressed if you're 50 people standing in a demonstration, even though millions are agreeing with you. So I think that person to person engagement, interaction is very important, and for that we need these platforms. We need freedom of movement. We need these countries to understand that visa restrictions are not good I mean, these kind of networks are not just doing human rights work. They are actually making social changes so that your societies become more civilized. There is a progress in society and not just progress in the state. So these are some of the things I think we all as human rights defenders are looking at, and also reacting in whatever way is most appropriate for us to do. We have to become more strategic, there is no doubt about it, whether it's at the national level or at the international level. And secondly, I think these kind of restrictions by authoritarian countries, rulers in our own countries, make it very difficult for us to raise public opinion in our own countries if we don't have freedom of movement, freedom of assembly, freedom of expression. In those situations, pressure of public opinion outside is very important for us. And so I think the social media is important to sustain the movement, but not for creating that movement. Creating that movement only will come with person to person interaction.
And I'm afraid we are out of time. Hina Jilani, it's been a most engrossing and enriching conversation. Thank you very much for being with me this evening. My guest tonight was Hina Jilani, attorney at law from Pakistan, and of course an acclaimed award-winning human rights activist. So thank you very much to her.
Thank you.
And thank you very much to you at home for watching. Don't go away because the news is coming up next. Take care.